And now I would invite you to stand out of respect for our gospel reading, which comes to us this morning from John chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. John chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. Starting at verse 1. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up to the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. Won't you pray with me? God of grace and glory, we give you thanks. We give you thanks that we can be here to worship you as a community. God, this morning we ask that you speak to us about what it means to be in community through you. We ask that the meditation of my lips and of all of our hearts are pleasing in your sight, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. So if you have read over your issue of the tidings this month, you will have seen that we are headed on a journey of 3 sermon series. I don't know if that's actually how you say that, but it's 3 sermon series. There are 3 different series. Pedro and I kind of argued about, is there a plural for series or not? But here we are. There will be 3 different ones. And this week we start our first one, which comes from the Greater New Jersey Annual Conference, has put together a team called the Breakthrough Team that works on resourcing pastors and worship leaders and lead people at churches to be able to put together sermons and worship experiences. So a couple of the prayers and other things from this morning came from that team, as well as the structure of the series as a whole, and most of the preaching notes come from them as well. It's actually a really great tool, especially for someone like me who is busy toddler wrangling and infant feeding and all of the things that happen in my house during a week. So I'm very grateful for this particular resource, and so we'll do this for the next 4 weeks, this week and then 3 weeks, and then we'll start a new series, and I'll talk about that one when we get there. So let's get started. This week we are talking about, the series is called Summer of Love, which I know kind of makes you feel and think a little hippie, and that's not quite where we're headed, but this week we're going to talk about loving community and what it means to be a part of a loving community and how to love in community. I've been a part of many different organizations and communities since my youth, in church and outside of church, and all around. And I think of a couple that I've been a part of in my young adulthood that have had a real big impact on me. Some of them are only on Facebook or other technological means, right? So I'm part of a United Methodist Clergy Moms group on Facebook, and I've met a handful of the clergy moms, right? Most of them in the New Jersey Conference, some of them not. But it's a very awesome group that I can just say, hey, this happened to me and I don't know where to go. Do you have any advice? And sometimes it's church related, and sometimes it's mom related, and sometimes it's church mom related. And it's been a very amazing group to kind of help me to know, yes, you're on the right track, or no, try this instead, or it even has helped me think of things that I have not thought of, right? So sometimes I'll type in, I don't need advice, I just need some love and some prayers. And then somebody will say, oh yes, I've been through this and this is what we made sure to do. And I would say, oh, great, I had not even thought of that. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. I'm also a part of a fitness community, which is new, but has really helped me to stick to my fitness journey and my fitness goals, because being a part of the community helps me to say, okay, if I don't check in, somebody is going to say something. And so I definitely need to be active and part of this community as well. And I'm grateful for that group in the ways that it has helped me to be more confident and more comfortable in my own skin, and helped me to grow as a person. But I don't really want to talk about either one of those. Those are just a couple of examples of the communities in my young adulthood that I've been a part of that have shaped me a little bit. But I do want to talk about my youth group. So this is kind of an in-church community, but we did a lot of stuff outside of church and other things. And if I had not been a part of the youth group, I would not have been involved in conference-level youth activities. And if I had not been involved in conference-level youth activities, I would not have been involved in something called the Mission of Peace, which is a yearly trip. And they've taken a couple of years off because of COVID, which is completely understandable. But it's a yearly trip to different nations to foster understanding. So when I was a senior in high school, I went with 25 other youth and 5 adults to India. And while we were there, we learned a lot about what it means to be Indian, what it means to have faith, what it means to grow up in India. We had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and I would be happy to tell you more about that if you want, but I could really stand up here all day and talk about my trip to India, even though it was 11 years ago. But while I was there is when I really felt my tug into ministry. I've been kind of feeling it and ignoring it for a while, but in India, God said, you're not going to ignore this anymore. I'm going to completely change your entire path, and here you go. And I listened, and here I am. So without this community, my whole life might be on a completely different trajectory. I believe that I would have eventually ended up in the pulpit anyways, right? I believe that that is a strong calling in my life, and God would have found a different avenue had I not ended up there. But I might not be here. I might not be married to Pedro. I might not have ended up at Drew. I firmly believe that this community that I was a part of really helped to shape a big part of my identity. And communities and different groups are part of the way that we find our sense of identity. And so this morning, I want to give you all an opportunity to lower your mask for a minute and share with us about communities that you're a part of that have helped to shape your identity. Go ahead, Karen.
I belong to 2 hope groups.
Karen is lifting up book clubs or book groups that she's a part of that have really gone beyond discussing the books. When she was dealing with her breast cancer, they were really there and really supportive of her, and so she gives thanks to God for that community for sure. Are there other groups that you all would like to lift up this morning? Cece?
Well, I want to one book club that I have a group of moms that were, our daughters were all Indian maidens, which is like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and such as through the YMCA. And we did camping and stuff. The girls were older than they don't have children, but we still meet about once a month and have dinner together and catch up and stuff. But actually, I would like to lift up the church because this community has been one that has been more consistent over the past, especially the past few years as we've dealt with COVID. And, it has been a community that even if it was via Zoom or on Facebook, has been there. Has been kind of a rock of my existence, my day-to-day life, the larger life as I looked ahead as to what might be coming and what's going on around me. So I like to live in the church community.
So Cece lifted up a couple of different communities. She's part of a book club. I'm just repeating so that the people online actually get a chance to hear you. I know Eva has mentioned a couple times, hi Eva, that she can't hear prayer requests. So she's asked me a couple times to remind people about saying it into the microphone. And so that's why I'm repeating you. It's not to make sure it takes longer or whatever. It's so that everybody gets a chance to hear. So Cece lifted up a couple of groups. She said she's part of a book club and part of a mom's group that was organically created when their daughters did something called Indian Maidens, which is basically Boy Scout or Girl Scout through the YMCA. And their daughters are mostly grown and have kids of their own now, and so it seems a little silly, but they get together once a month and catch up and have lunch or whatever because they are such a part of each other's life that it's important to them. But further, Cece said, I would like to lift up the church, that without the church, she's not sure where exactly she would go, right? There's been some consistency, even in the past year and a half or so, where we have been unsure of what's next. Facebook and Zoom and other things have allowed her to stay connected to the church, and the church community is really a rock and a stable foundation for her. And a couple people echoed their agreement to her statement. Cookie. Cookie is lifting up one of the ministries that she does, whether it's for the church or for her family. She is somebody who calls people during the week, and she has found that through this there is nothing she can't talk about. She calls, whether it's shut-ins from church or her family that lives across the country or friends she hasn't connected with in a while, and this is really an opportunity for her to grow. And I know, she didn't say this, but I know that she feels that this is a calling from God. So she'll call somebody and they'll say, oh, I don't really want to be a bother, and Cookie will say, you're not a bother. This is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And so we give thanks for that community, and we give thanks for Cookie for the ministry that she's doing through this community. Are there other communities or groups you'd like to lift up this morning? Carol.
Besides the church, especially the one in which I grew up, for giving me such a foundation in faith, when I got to college, there were a group of other young women that are still, 40 years later, 30 plus years later, are still a vitally important part of my life. We have been at each other's weddings, we've been godparents for each other's children, we've just kind of been there for each other.
Carol lifted up a couple different groups. She echoed Cece's sentiment about church, this church and other churches she's been a part of. She talked about a group of friends that she made in college that even 40 plus years later, they are still in communication and still holding each other up. They've been at each other's weddings and supported each other through children and other things that happen in life. And she lifted up a group called Stitch and Chat that she may or may not be a part of anymore, but it was an opportunity to get together with other women who shared the same hobby and work on whatever they were working on with their stitching and talk about life. And so she's grateful for the ways that these communities have either provided a foundation or helped her to grow throughout the years. Are there other communities this morning? Okay. As you heard this morning, we read the feeding of the 5,000, and John says that it was 5,000 in all, but it is likely that it was much more than 5,000 because usually men were the ones who were counted and women and children were not. But it is likely that there were 5,000 plus the women and children as part of this particular miracle. The feeding of the 5,000 is one of the signs in the Gospel of John that witnesses to the identity of Jesus. Apart from the resurrection, it is the only miracle or sign that is found in all 4 Gospels. So there are lots of miracles that are found in 3, but not the last one, or a couple of the Gospels, but not the other 2, or even just one Gospel and not the other 3. But this, feeding the 5,000 and the resurrection, are the only 2 that you will hear about from all 4 authors. The story is an example of the table fellowship that was at the center of Jesus' ministry. Jesus invites the crowd to break bread with him. While Jesus could have performed this sign by himself, he chooses to use the boy's willingness to share what he had and as an example to others. He chooses to use this little boy's lunch, this little boy who is very willing to give up his lunch, by the way, to show exactly who he is. The disciples, even though they were doubtful at first, witnessed the boy's generosity and the way Jesus transforms that generousness through a small gift into something much greater. In asking the disciples to gather up the leftover bread, Jesus both emphasizes the miracle that has taken place and invites them to participate in the community of table fellowship. They become participants in Jesus' work of serving and feeding. Through the generosity and the gifts of the community, the crowd is fed. We witness to the identity of Jesus by serving the community in mission. When we share our gifts, we strengthen and build community. We also claim our own identity as people who belong to Jesus' community. This is not a community characterized by insiders and outsiders, but first and foremost by what it has received. It has received the grace of Jesus Christ. So first and foremost, our community is a community because we share the receiving of this gift of grace. Our community is also recognized by the way we witness to that grace by serving others. It is important for us to recognize that Jesus understood attending to basic physical needs as an essential piece of evangelism and a tangible sign of God's grace. So this morning, I would like you to think about the ways in which God is calling you to use your resources and gifts to build and serve the greater community that we are a part of. Is God calling you to send notes of encouragement to people who you haven't seen in a while? Is God calling you to knock on doors of people who you haven't seen in a while? I mean, obviously, we're in a weird time, right, where that can be a little dicey, but definitely, if that's something that you're called to, do it safely, right? Don't just show up and have a conversation with people, but definitely, if you're feeling called to reach out to people, there's probably a good reason. So take the time, use your gifts of listening, or your gifts of writing, or your gifts of empathy and compassion to reach out to those who you haven't seen in a while. Is God calling you to donate some of your time, whether it's here at the food pantry or somewhere else in the community? Is God calling you to think about the other gifts that you might have and ways in which you might be able to use them to help grow and strengthen our community? I think of Cece, who was a journalist in a previous life, and now uses her editorial skills to help with pretty much anything that comes out of the church office, right? She reads over the newsletter to make sure there's no glaring mistakes, any letters that we want to send, emails, Facebook posts, etc. And so I wonder if there are other gifts that you all have that might be able to help grow the community or serve the community in some way. Friends, that's the invitation for this week. I invite you to spend some time figuring out the ways that God is calling you to reach out to people who might be overlooked. To think about the ways that they might also be able to contribute. To think about the ways that you might be able to contribute that you haven't been yet. And I invite you to use your gifts and talents and graces and resources to help build and strengthen our community this week. May it be so. Amen.